forest. That's great. Again, I'm Joshua Morris. I'm with the Seattle Audubon Society. I also sit on the Urban Forestry Commission, but I'm not here in that capacity. I'm here on behalf of birds and people. For context, Seattle Audubon has been advocating for Seattle's urban forest since our founding in 1916. One of our organization's first advocacy efforts was around protecting our city parks and open spaces from illegal logging. I found newsletters from the 80s that are pushing city council for stronger tree protections. We've got a history, 100 years plus, of advocating for trees, and here I am still waving that banner. Seattle's urban forest is surprisingly diverse and relatively luxe compared to many other cities. We have a lot to be proud of. We also face challenges including tree loss, equitable tree distribution, and climate change. I spend a lot of my time advocating for trees because we envision people and birds thriving in our local communities, and we can't realize that without a healthy, protected urban forest. As Professor Brown was mentioning, our urban forest provides real tangible benefits to the city, its residents, and visitors. A lot of those services can be quantified with a dollar value. However, some are more difficult to hang a dollar sign on, particularly those from the cultural services. However, as that 2012 report found, Seattle's urban forest provides approximately $23 million in annual savings to the city in terms of carbon sequestration, pollution removal, and residential energy savings. This should be viewed as a basement value. It doesn't include any values related to stormwater management, recreation values of parks, and other such cultural values. The report also found that the urban forest replacement cost would be around $4.9 billion. And it's interesting to note that our urban forest has grown into an infrastructural asset that would outprice the SR 99 tunnel downtown. The benefits of the urban forest don't begin and end with humans, however. There are over 100 bird species that use Seattle's trees. This includes local resident birds like the red-breasted nuthatch and seasonal migratory visitors like the Wilson's warbler. The forest these birds would have accessed 200 years ago would have been very different from our urban forest today. Then, big old conifers dominated, western hemlocks, Douglas fir, western red cedar, but there would have been Gary oak savannas, coastal prairies, peat bogs, and extensive wetlands around the lakes in the mouth of the Duwamish. Urbanization over the last 170 years has drastically altered nature in our city, including the introduction of trees from around the world. There are approximately 54 tree species native to the Pacific Northwest. That includes from Oregon all the way up to Vancouver, BC. Today in just Seattle alone, we might be able to find 1,000 tree types, including subspecies, cultivars, and varieties. These changes have been good for some birds. For instance, the Anna's hummingbird, there's an image of it feeding two nestlings there in the center of this slide. Seattle Audubon has been counting birds each Christmas for the last 90 years. We started in 1928, and we didn't document a single Anna's hummingbird until 1965. In 1972, we haven't stopped seeing them since. I suspect this is due to new stable winter food sources provided by winter flowering plants and trees, and people hanging nectar feeders around their homes. So my takeaway from this is that if we maintain and enhance the diversity of our urban forest, we can provide stable year-round resources for diversity and abundance of birds. This becomes increasingly important in an era of climate change. This last October, the National Audubon Society updated their science of climate change vulnerability for 604 bird species in North America. Their findings are dire. 389 species of those are projected to lose over 50% of their breeding habitat under a 3-degree warming scenario. These birds will be forced to find suitable nesting conditions elsewhere, and they may not survive. 108 of these climate-threatened birds occur in our own backyard. Some, like the dark-eyed junco, are extremely common in Seattle, and it's hard to imagine our neighborhoods without them. Our urban forest can help. Our urban forest, like the Anna's hummingbird, other species may benefit when we maintain and enhance the diversity, structure, and connectivity and distribution of our trees. The urban forest may be able to provide abundant year-round resources for birds as climate change introduces uncertainty in more natural ecosystems. Diversity is particularly important, and it's something we can be relatively proud of in Seattle. For instance, I did some calculations to compare street tree diversity in 5 different cities where data were available. The key column is to the right, effective number of genera. This provides a comparable indicator of the diversity of our street tree communities. Seattle's value of 20 is 23. This compares to Buffalo's 14.6. Ours is 57% more diverse than Buffalo, New York street tree community, 28% more diverse than New York City's, 35% more diverse than Vancouver, BC's. Only Portland scores more favorably, but just by 2%, and they have a bigger city area anyway. The diversity of our urban forest is enhanced further by trees on private property, parks, arboreta, and institutions. You can meet trees from every tree-bearing continent on a walk through Seattle. Single-family residential properties are reportedly harbor the greatest diversity and the greatest number of conifers. We often lose these trees on the site of property as we make room for more neighbors in our city. Unfortunately, we've not been tracking how many or which kinds of trees we've been losing from private property in a meaningful way. The Urban Forestry Commission has recommended capturing that info through a tree removal and replacement permit and an associated database. Those data could help guide us in our replanting efforts to maintain and enhance diversity. Structural diversity is also important. Different birds have different needs and use forest resources in different ways. Sparrows tend to forage on the ground layer and benefit from leaf litter. Hummingbirds nest in the shrub layer. Chickadees glean insects a bit higher up in the understory, and eagles seek good vantage points in the tops of trees. Tree groves tend to provide this structural diversity. Though largely concentrated in parks, groves are still scattered throughout our neighborhoods and institutional lands. Protecting groves is something that the Urban Forestry Commission is recommending in their draft ordinance submitted to the council. Replacing groves is extremely challenging in neighborhoods where plantable space is scarce. Seattle Audubon has been counting birds in Seattle area parks for decades, and what we've been able to do is look at the observation frequency of certain forest-dependent species like brown creepers, varied thrush, or pileated woodpeckers, and see how that correlates with the tree canopy cover at those parks. So the graph on the right here shows an observation frequency index on the y-axis, which basically means how often do we see these birds when we go out looking. On the bottom axis, there's a percent canopy cover increasing from left to right. We've plotted 7 different parks here, and you find what we'd expect. As canopy cover increases, we tend to see more of these forest-dependent species. However, you'll notice at the very top, Seward Park is an extreme outlier. We see birds these forest-dependent birds almost every time we go out and look. Despite the fact that it has a similar canopy cover to Carkeek Park. If you've ever been there, you might know that Carkeek Park is dominated by deciduous bigleaf maples and red alders, whereas Seward Park is dominated by some of the last remaining old-growth conifers in Seattle. And though this data doesn't prove it, one hypothesis could be that those big old conifers are providing superior habitat values to forest-dependent species than some of the deciduous species do. Another thing I'd point out about this graph is that the model trend is logarithmic, meaning that small changes in canopy cover can have big impacts on what happens to our observations of birds. The last point about this is that once we reach about 20% canopy cover, we don't observe these birds anymore. So there may be thresholds at which canopy cover determines whether or not these birds can persist in our city. That's important to think about as we're thinking about the canopy cover across our city and connectivity. Connectivity would mean dense pathways of connected contiguous habitat across the city, but also making sure that our neighborhoods can support a diversity and abundance of birds too. And one coarse way of looking at that is just kind of at the 2016 LiDAR canopy assessment scale. And at first glance, it looks pretty good. Seattle looks pretty good, but it's unevenly distributed. So here are some maps of the canopy cover broken down by neighborhood throughout Seattle. Green indicates canopy cover in excess of the threshold indicated at the bottom of each map, while blue indicates lower than the threshold indicated at the bottom of the map. So 28% is the aggregate citywide total of canopy cover across the city. Many of our communities are lacking that level of canopy canopy cover. And over a dozen have less or equal to 20% canopy cover. For context, the city of LA has a canopy cover of 20%. Dozens of our neighborhoods have a canopy cover lower than Los Angeles. In these neighborhoods, we wouldn't expect to see some of those charismatic birds like the pileated woodpecker or the brown creeper. And further, there are some really tree deficient neighborhoods, including the International District in Georgetown, Belltown, and some of the other downtown core communities. Addressing these equity issues is something that I know our urban forestry management team is tackling, but it's crucially important, especially when making sure that our communities are resilient to the impacts of climate change. So before I finish, I just want to make the point that the most important thing that we can do for our urban forest is to protect the trees that we already have. The urban forest is a high-value investment that has been maturing for decades. It can take only a moment to fall a tree and lose that investment. A stronger, funded, enforced tree protection ordinance will help protect our urban forest as part of a comprehensive strategy that anticipates future conditions and needs for birds and wildlife. So thank you.
We're really pleased to have somebody from the city of Portland come up